Góðan daginn, góði gestir. Ég vildi bjóða ykkur hjartanlega velkomin á pallborðsumræður Landsvirkjunar gagnaver í leit að staðsetningu. Elín Rós Líndal heiti ég og með þann öfluga starfsgreinahóp innan samtaka iðnaðarins sem heitir DCI og það mér sannur heiður að fá að vera með ykkur hér í dag og fræðast aðeins meira þennan merkilega iðnað. En ég vildi fara létt yfir dagskrána og nokkur atriði og við munum byrja á að fá til okkar frábæran gest, einn helsta sérfræðing heims í staðarvali gagnavera, Phil Snyder. Hann forseti Site Selectors Guild og hann ætlar að fara yfir með okkur hvað skiptir máli þegar kemur að staðsetningum og staðarvali gagnavera. Eftir að hann hefur talað þá ætla ég að bjóða upp á Q&A og það væri virkilega gaman ef þið standið upp, berið upp spurningar og kynnið ykkur og fyrirtækin ykkar. Og eftir það munum við fara í pallborðsumræður þar sem við valið sérfræðinga á sviði iðnaðar gagnaver til þess að ræða við okkur hverja þarfir gagnavers iðnaðarins eru. Af því við erum svo framalega þegar kemur að samfélagsmiðlum þá vildi ég segja ykkur það að fundinum verður streymt beint á vísi.is og á heimasíðu Landsvirkjunar og svo ætlum við líka að tvíta frá fundinum og hashtagið #VAFGagnaver. Þannig að það munu eflaust koma spurningar héðan og þaðan til okkar. En fyrstan hér í pontu vil ég kynna hann Björgvin Skúla Sigurðsson sem framkvæmdastjóri markas- og viðskipta þróunarsviðs Landsvirkjunar. Gjörðu svo vel.
Ágætu fundargestir, verið velkomin á þennan fund Landsvirkjunar staðarval gagnavera. Landsvirkjun hefur nokkur ára skeið unnið að því að breikka hóp viðskiptavina sinna og auka fjölbreytni í þeirri starfsemi sem stundu hér á landi á sviði orkufreks iðnaðar. Í þessu sambandi höfum við horft mikið til gagnavera enda nota þau bæði mikið af orku og hafa verið í miklum vexti út allan heim. Gagnaver eiga því mikið erindi til Íslands. En það þarf margt að koma til þess að fyrirtæki ákveði að staðsetja gagnaver á Íslandi. Aðgangur að raforku að öðrum kostum ólöstuðum stærsti þátturinn í slíkri ákvörðun en það þarf mun meira að koma til. Byggingar og rafkerfi, tölvubúnaður, rafiðnaðarmenn, tölvunarfræðingar, öryggisverðir og vélfræðingar vegna varaaflsstöðva eru augljós dæmi. En í umgjörðina þarf líka endurskoðendur og lögfræðinga. Það þarf skattareglur, það þarf leyfisveitingar frá sveitarfélögum, það þarf innviðið á borð við vatnsveitu og hitaveitu. Í stóru myndinni þarf líka aðgang að velmenntuðu starfsfólki sem skilur erlend tungumál, aðgang að flugi og samgöngum á sjó, traust réttarkerfi og reglugerðarumhverfi sem fólk getur unnið við. Svo mætti áfram telja. Það því ljóst að rafmagn einungis einn partur af stærri heild. Hér hafa margir hlutverki að gegna. Jafnvel þó Landsvirkjun geti selt rafmagn þurfum við að treysta því að aðrir standi klárir á sínum hlutverkum og leysi þau á faglegan hátt hver með sína hagsmuni að leiðarljósi. Og þetta ástæðan fyrir því að Landsvirkjun heldur þennan fund í dag. Við höfum boðið hagsmunaaðilum til þess að hlýða á sérfræðing í staðarvali gagnavera þar sem hann mun lýsa því hvernig slíkt val fer fram. Phil Snyder hefur 29 ára reynslu af ráðgjafastörfum, sérstaklega á sviði staðsetningavals fyrir fyrirtæki í fjölbreyttum atvinnugreinum. Hann hefur hins síðari ár unnið mikið í tengslu við gagnaverum allan heim. Hann rekur nú sitt eigið fyrirtæki, Snyder Strategic Consulting, en auk þess stjórnarformaður í samtökunum Site Selectors Guild. Ég get sagt ykkur það að þessi maður veit hvað hann syngur. Af honum gott að læra hvað skiptir máli og fá ráðgjöf hvar fyrirtæki og aðrir hagsmunaaðilar geti bætt sig. Ísland nýtur þess að hafa mikla kosti sem nýst geta gagnaverum. Grænt endurnýjanlegt rafmagn, kalt loftslag sem nýtist við kælingu og tölvubúnaðar, góðar fjarskiptaeiningar með ljósleiðurum við önnur lönd og staðsetning í hafinu á milli Evrópu og Bandaríkjanna. Það okkar Íslendinga að nýta þetta tækifæri. það nýtir sig ekki sjálft. Við hjá Landsvirkjun viljum alltaf læra og gera betur og við bjóðum ykkur hér og öðrum hagsmunaaðilum samvinnu á því sviði. Ég vona að fundurinn verði ykkur gagnlegur. Takk fyrir.
Aðeins til þess að láta ykkur vita þá velkomið að byrja upp spurningar á íslensku vegna þess að Phil með túlk sem ætlar að tala ensku við hann, þannig að hann hafi verið allt þýtt og hashtagið ll-gagnaver, ll-gagnaver fyrirgefi. En eins og Björgvin kom inn á þá hann Phil Snyder, forseti alþjóðlegra samtaka staðarvalssérfræðinga og hefur áratuga reynslu í staðarvalsmálum. Ég vildi nefna aðeins að hann hefur verið í verkefnum fyrir fyrirtæki á borð við American Express, Toyota og Apple og Morgan Stanley, svo einhver séu nefnt. And Philip, I just wanted to ask you to come and do your presentation. Thank you.
Good morning. Let me go back here. So we're fine. How is everybody today? Okay, so you probably have already figured out I'm going to do this presentation in English, and there's a simple reason for that. I don't speak a lick of Icelandic, so I have to do it this way. So bear with me if you have any questions, and we can take them later on. And I do have this beautiful little translation piece here, so I'll be able to understand it if you ask the question in Icelandic. Also, I do have a confession to make. I am not a data center manager. I don't build data centers. I don't design data centers. I've never run one. But I am a location expert, and this is what I've done, as you've heard in the introduction, for the last 30 years of my life. I've advised companies on where in the world they should build their operations, and taking a logical and objective approach. That has included data centers, but it has included automotive plants and steel plants and giant shared service centers and headquarters and R&D facilities and the like. So I understand the process very well. I led what still today is the largest team in the world that does this around the world as a partner for Deloitte Consulting for many years. So what you're going to hear about today is the process for making these decisions and how companies make, when they make a logical decision. And I will tell you right up front that companies don't always make logical decisions. They make very poor decisions. We see them in the paper every day. But when they follow the right process, and you have companies, and examples, of course, are like Google and Apple. They have professional units doing this. I know because people that I hired and worked for me for many years now run those operations, and they run them in a very professional manner, and they make very sound decisions. But not all companies make those decisions that way, particularly young upstart IT companies, for example. They may make decisions in a very haphazard way when it comes to things outside of their expertise. So you have to wrestle with that sometimes companies don't make good decisions. But I'm going to take you through the process, how it's done. And I've got good contribution from my colleagues and members of the Site Selectors Guild. Some of them have spent most of their days working on data centers now. One of my good colleagues does the data center work for eBay. And he's quite busy doing work constantly on eBay's large and ever-evolving data center location strategy. So some of the insights you will see here are coming not just from me, but from my colleagues at the Site Selectors Guild. Okay, so as I said, we'll have three primary topics to go through before we get into Q&A. First of all, I want to go over the overview of the location process in general, regardless of whether it's a data center or any type of operation, just to let you know how companies, when they take an organized, logical, and rational approach, how they make these sorts of decisions, or at least how they should make these sorts of decisions. And then we'll take that same process and we'll turn into the data centers and talk about their drivers and some of the trends that we're seeing for making the decisions for data centers. And then we'll bring it home to Iceland and what are some of the implications. What do we see, first blush, as outsiders, as site selection experts, the positives and also some of the challenges that Iceland might have in the world of attracting and growing and expanding data centers, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So first of all, let's go to the process itself. There are a lot of drivers in any type of corporate location decision, and every company is a bit different, and every function within the company is a bit different, and every industry is different. So I'm often asked, what are the driving factors, or what are the reasons companies locate in place A versus place B? And I say, which company, which time, which process, which industry, who's leading the company. All of these things make a difference. But there are some factors that we can point to that almost always are important. No surprise, and this is particularly true, of course, of data centers, which are cost centers often, not often profit centers sometimes. And it's to reduce operating costs. They want to be lower than their competitors. They want to be lower than where they are right now. They want to have better market access. That could be physical or could be virtual market access. They need to penetrate the market faster, better, get closer to the customers. They want to reduce risk. They have no tolerance for risk anymore. They want to have talent, and this is becoming, even for data centers, which are relatively small amount of talent given the capital investment, the talent still is critical to running the operation. And places that have great talent and a great ability to sustain that talent and produce more or attract it from the outside thrive in today's market. Those that don't shrivel. Good supporting infrastructure, particularly electric power. They may have an old operation they want to replace. They may be introducing a new product or a new service, and they want to do it with a state-of-the-art facility in a location that's custom selected for that particular service or process. Sometimes it's tax. Not often, but it does happen. You hear about it in the press, for example. The media say, well, it's all about going to low tax locations. I can tell you for a fact that is not true. That's important, but there are only been a handful of projects and clients in my entire 30-year career where tax has been a driving issue. Important, yes, but not usually the driver. They have to run the operation and make money first before they worry about taxes. And sometimes it's about the labor management relations. The slide you already saw, and the point of this slide is really that in the past, even when I started my career, there was generally one thing that drove it. We have to get to the new market at any cost. We have new customers to serve. We have to get there before our competitors do. Others say, well, we're running out of people. We got to get the talent. We don't get the skills that we need in our current location. And still others say it's all about reducing costs. And of course, over the last 20 years or 30 years, this is all you saw in the business press. It's all about going to China or India or Eastern Europe for low-cost labor, and that drove everything. And I can tell you there were a lot of casualties in China and India and Eastern Europe because they chased labor and they forgot about practically everything else. Yes, we have cheap labor, and that's all we have. So they made a lot of mistakes. So they've learned from that mistake and realized that, we have to have all of these things. We have to optimize all of these things in a logical process. We can't just have cheap labor if we have no electric power, we have a terrible regulatory environment, and our site can't be serviced by anything. So we have to have everything. So the difference in site selection projects or corporate location strategy today than when I began is that they expect to balance all of these things. So there's generally a process, and it's often 3, maybe 4 phases that are followed when this is done in a rational and logical manner. First is to set the strategy. You can't know where you're going unless you have a strategy about what you're trying to achieve. You do a basic assessment, which we call screening in our field, and then you validate, and finally you implement. So the beginning part is very critical. I often tell clients this is the shortest phase, but it's the most important, and it's often the one they don't do. They do classic, a lot of clients, you call it, ready, fire, aim. And they forget about the aiming part in the beginning. And this is where you set not only the goals and objectives, but what is going to guide the decision? What are the criteria? How should we weight those criteria? Let's get those project specifications for startup, but what are those specifications going to look like in year 3, in year 5, in year 7, as we grow with our expectations? How is the balance between talent and, let's say, electric power and regulatory environment and customer access going to change as this evolves? How are we going to make this decision? How are we going to weight one criteria versus the other? How are we going to treat costs versus non-costs? Because we know the non-costs, which are less easy to quantify, are still important drivers. How are we going to take that into consideration with cost? How are we going to take that into consideration with risks, both known and unknown risks? Once we have that, what is the search area where we're looking for? Many clients start too narrow. Others start too wide. I had one a number of years ago where sitting with the C-suite, this happened to be a Norwegian client, and I was there with the board and the CEO, and I said, so let's narrow down the search area. Well, where is going to make the most sense for us to look at? And they said, yes, we've thought about that. We're starting with Earth. And they literally wanted a process to prove to the shareholders that they looked everywhere. So some parts were easy. It was quite easy to get rid of Kazakhstan, for example, but others, we had to narrow it down, and they wanted to see a process of elimination and a logic that when they got to the smaller search area, they could prove it to the board and prove it to the shareholders that they followed a logical approach. And once that's set, then we move through the assessment phase, the screening phase, and trying to get from large to small, looking at costs and conditions of various types to come up with a short list. When the short list is gathered, then there's intense due diligence and investigation that's done, and finally the negotiations, and you make the selection. So it follows a very logical pattern. And again, there's a lot of things that they're trying to accomplish, and as they go through this process, they start to realize, there's far more going on here than we thought. This isn't about finding some new real estate. This is core to the strategy of our company. Making a mistake, you think about a large data center. It may be $200-300 million US. It may be $1 billion US. Making a mistake can be fatal. It will certainly be career altering to whoever made that decision. And as in the end of their career by making a mistake, and it happens. But they're trying to there are various large-scale goals that they're trying to achieve, and I list some of them here. Maybe the most important is generating shareholder value. If this isn't generating value for their shareholders, they're going to rightly say, well, why are we doing it? They need to manage those stakeholders. They need to manage their expectations. And this is why so many of these projects are confidential. And you don't know about them. Maybe the government, few people may know, but everybody else does not know because they have to manage those expectations because they may do nothing. And they certainly don't want their competitors to know what they're doing. And they often don't want their employees to know because it creates all sorts of fear. Am I going to lose my job? Why should I keep showing up every day? They don't understand it. And often in these projects, the only people who know are the C-suite, the new manager, and a core team that swore to confidentiality, and the site selector. And that's it. Maybe the board. And that's it. And they need to keep it that way. But they need to manage a lot of different players' expectations. And ultimately then, the key point is they need to actually improve things. There's something in here that they need to improve, whether it's costs or the market access, the ecosystem, what have you. So they're managing a lot of ideas here. And as I said, they vary by industry, but there are a few things that you can really point to. Certainly costs, they want low to moderate costs. It's not always about low costs, but they have to be at least workable costs and competitive with the industry that they're in. They want to develop and attract talent. This is becoming a critical issue for every industry around the world. It's the innovative and creative and highly educated talent that separates the great companies from the average companies. They have to have reliable and sustainable infrastructure. They have to know that they can scale over time and it can sustain it over time. They want to have various ecosystem available to them, suppliers and customers and amenities that they expect to run their business, and also that the professionals and talent that they have there are comfortable living in this area. They now, more often than not, particularly in technology industries, and this is certainly the case with data centers, is they want to feel good that they are in a cluster that looks familiar to them. It has the same ecosystem. Maybe not exact, but it feels right. So when they go to the coffee shop or they go out to the restaurant or at night, they're likely to run into people who think and act a bit like they do, including the services that support them. Yes, they want to be in a good tax and regulatory system that's supportive and not onerous. And last but not least, they have to be able to know they can always implement. They can execute the plan, and that somebody is not standing in the way of the plan. So you may have gathered by now that this is not a process of inclusion. This is a process of elimination. The site selector or the company that's running this project is trying to knock out other areas, and who's ever left standing at the end wins. And they're constantly providing harder and finer criteria, and the screens get finer and finer. It may start out with customer access or speed to market, and it narrows through a series of screens until you get to a final location. So it's like a funnel, and out of the bottom of the funnel comes very few that can make the list. You won't be able to read this, or maybe you can read a little, but the framework, at least for the professional site locators, is something that we key on and get them to agree to. Yes, it can evolve, but we want them to agree to it from the beginning. It is not just about cost, and within costs, we make sure that they understand it's only about those costs that vary by geography. The cost of computer servers, except for the tax on them, is the same everywhere. But the cost of talent, the cost of real estate, the cost of electric power, these things vary by geography. Those are the ones we need to measure. And then we need to put them in comparison with a variety of business and operating conditions. And we also have to look at risks in real estate. So we need to create a framework that we can measure and agree upon. These are how we are going to score, and these are how we're going to weight these factors. Okay, so that's the basic process. Now you're all experts in this. And we can move on to how does this apply to data centers? And some of this we've already talked about. So I'm taking the same process, the same slides, and I'm going to make it specific to data centers. First of all, again, we should start, I think, with access to the customer. Ultimately, this is about the customer. And we want to be able to make sure we're getting there. And there's some, they want very low latency. They want it to be non-perceptible. When that page loads, they don't want the customer to be able to see it. Some, it's not so important, it's just good enough. And for others, you can imagine like high-speed trading, nanoseconds are critical to that. So those that are very specifically focused on speed, they have a whole different geographic search area than those that aren't. Then next on the list would be robust electric power, high capacity, high quality, good cost. We want low risk, we can't have this thing damaged by natural disasters or man-made disasters. We want a good pool of talent. It may not be a huge employer, but the employees that are there are critical, and they're highly skilled and highly educated and constantly have to evolve in their skills because the technology evolves daily. So that pool, sustainable pool of IT talent is still quite important. Next, getting that thing built, getting it approved and built quickly. If you're putting that kind of investment, you're not going to wait for a year of permitting. I'll get into this more later. More and more important is this tax situation, particularly the tax on the equipment itself. Very important guiding principle. Again, we want to be able to scale. We may start with building 1, but we may end up with building 7 at the end of the day. So we want to be able to scale everything. Scale the power, scale the talent, scale the real estate, scale the services. et cetera. And again, as I said, we want to be in a place that feels good to us as an IT operation. It has the ecosystem that supports IT. The framework, again, we look at the costs, electricity, broadband, telecom, real estate, talent, engineering and construction, that's the E&C, the taxes on the property itself, and if there are profits, taxes, how they'll be treated, or sales, and the incentives themselves. I'll get into this a bit, but the incentives, like a lot of projects, start to become a driver, and they see, oh, well, Google got a lot of money from state or country X. Now everybody else wants what Google has. It becomes a driving factor, and I put it in cost because it's a cost offset. On the business conditions, we just went through this, and I gave you a sample weighting here. Every company will be different. Based on my weighting, you see where we put the emphasis on electric power in the screening. That is a heavy, heavy weight, but if it was a latency-driven company, that may actually be 20 or 25%. Or it may be not even on this list at all because it is a fatal flaw. You must be close or you're not even included. And it just narrowed the geographic search area because of the latency issues. But you see the other heavy weighted natural disasters. We don't want any risk. Can't explain that to our customers or to our board, and so forth. So you see where the weighting is. And on the risk side, first of all, I changed this one to real estate. We have to have a suitable site, no project. We have to have a site that is fully served, ready to go, and secure, and has good access. I can secure the access, and all of the infrastructure is ready available. Now, every company will have a slight play on this, but they will all, if they're doing it right, come up with a framework that looks something like this, probably pretty close. And then using the funnel method, we again start with customer access. Again, if it's very, very concerned about latency, they may not look at a place like Iceland because they have to be sometimes in the same city or only across town. That's how important it is. So you see some of these trading operations in Wall Street, New York, for example, the data center, they may say they're only comfortable with it being as far as New Jersey. That's as far because the milliseconds are so important to the trade itself. And this may also be in some things like virtual gaming, for example, where milliseconds are important. But then we go through the rest of the process where power, do we have the capacity at a moderate cost? Yes. You move through. Can we manage the climate and the natural disaster risk? Yes, we move through IT, real estate, total costs, and that's how we get to our short list. So I'll give you a quick example, not on data centers, but a project that I worked on in Iceland for solar grade silicon. We did a very similar process around the world, and out of the bottom of this, when we were very heavy on electric power, came Iceland, Quebec, and the island of Borneo for Malaysia. That's what came out the bottom because of the way it was driven with power and risk. So that's how that process works. Now, I'm going to go here and talk about, I've got a couple slides on here about the drivers, so I can get into some details. Some of this you've heard, but the first two would be power and risk. And here are a few of the bullet points around the power. They want low cost, sustainable, preferably green. This is becoming more important, particularly to high-profile IT companies, like a Google, for example. They want to be able to say that, not only to their board and to their employees, but of course to the world in general. And they want predictability. They want long-term contracts. They want to know, because power is such a critical variable in their cost structure, they want to know it is stable. On similar projects I've had, looking at other highly available power locations around the world driven by hydro. I'll give you an example. This was Manitoba in Canada. They were not discussed long-term contracts, even though their initial price was the lowest in the world that we looked at. They were eliminated because we couldn't predict how our contract would look in year 3 or year 5, so they were eliminated, even though they had the lowest going in cost. They expect dual feed. They want two sources of power, same company is fine, of course, but two different substations, because if there's a natural disaster or a man-made disaster at one substation, they can switch over immediately to the other substation. So they want two sources of power. And although you keep reading about technology is changing the power demands of the servers, they keep adding more and more servers. So it tends to go up and not down, because the demand for the service itself is outweighing the improvements in the technology in the servers. Next is low risk. These are mission critical operations, data centers are. It's very difficult for them to make a decision that looks like it has risks. Yet you see these things are built in seismic areas. There are lots of data centers, for example, in Florida, in the US. For the life of me, I can't understand that, because they have more electrical storms maybe than anywhere on Earth, but yet they're able to manage that. But if you're taking an objective approach, somebody will flag that and score that. So the natural disasters have to be manageable. And there's probably many of them that look at any area that has earthquakes or any area that has volcanoes and crosses them off without even doing any of the analysis. And they want no risk around data privacy, no risk around political stability, that the government is going to come in and take over the operation. Of course, you can imagine, very good fiber structure, very good broadband and telecom, got to have it. This is becoming more ubiquitous around the world. Maybe even 10 years ago, this was really a site selection factor for most urban or for most technology areas. This is an expectation. But at least in the US, and not so much the case here, but at least in the US, they expect multiple providers. They want choice in providers, so they can negotiate the price and the access to it. Taxes and incentives, as I mentioned earlier, are becoming a very big deal. No property taxes on the equipment, personal property taxes, and they want an exemption on the VAT or sales and use tax on the equipment. Those areas, this has become a very important issue around the world. If they are taxed, they are screened up, because they're constantly buying new servers, constantly buying computing equipment, and it's a huge cost, a huge capital cost. If there aren't exemptions on it, you never even hear about the project. And they want some sort of certainty, 10 years if they can get it, that they know the exemptions are going to be there at some level. IT pool, this is at the end of the day an IT operation. They want data center experience, or at least good IT experience, and they want the ability to have a sustainable pool. The university and the technical colleges are putting them out on a regular basis, and there isn't so much demand that I'm in constant competition. But I also want to be able to bring them in from elsewhere. I'm not going to start the operation with just people that are in this local market. I'm going to bring in 5, 10 people from somewhere else, maybe from Europe, somewhere else in Europe, maybe from North America. I have to be able to attract them. I have to feel good that the best talent out there would be comfortable living there. Low operating costs, stable and predictable across these issues that we talked about. The ability to get it up and going. Can we design it, construct it, implement it very quickly at a moderate cost? Are there going to be hurdles? Is it an efficient process? If I need zoning changes, how fast will that happen? How long will it take for me to get my permits? How long will it take for me to get the license? How fast can this building come out of the ground and start up operations? The difference between 9 months and 18 months could be just millions and millions of dollars. I'll make an estimate of what the value to me as a company is for every day of lost operation. Even some area that comes in at higher cost, but they can get the operation running 9 months faster than you, I'd take maybe 20 million, and I'd put it as a negative against the area that takes longer. Whatever that number is, we'll calculate it and take that as a negative upfront number. This comes out day one. That's a penalty from day one by not being able to get up quickly. And then let's start looking at the site itself. Is it secure? Is it outside of a seismic area? Is it outside of the flight path? They want often to be outside of the city for human issues. You know, I don't want somebody to be able to just stumble in there. I don't want somebody wrecking their car going through the gate or whatever it is. But I still have to be able to service it. I have to put out fires, et cetera. And then I spent some time on incentives here because they're becoming so important, certainly in the United States, but this is happening all over the world. And it's a challenge because so many incentive policies around the world are based only on job creation, right? So how many jobs? You know, I'd rather have 500 low-paying jobs than 75 high-paying jobs. That's almost how it is set up now. And they're not looking at the overall impact. And it is curious to me because the policy is set up as if it's either or. You get one or the other. Well, we can only give it to this company or that company, but clearly that's not true. You can do both. But the policies themselves are set up where they hamper data centers because they're based on pure number of jobs, not even necessarily the quality of the job or how it fits into your economy or how it fits into the long-term vision and strategy of the economy. So the capital expenditures are high, very high. The salaries are high, but the jobs are low. So this is a problem for data centers in many places. As I said, and I'll keep saying this, exemptions on VAT and not treating the servers and computer equipment as property for taxation purposes is an expectation. It's a screening expectation up front. They need to know that this is going to happen because so many areas are offering it now, it's becoming an expectation. And I've given you this quotation from Microsoft that I picked up, and it had a very pronounced impact on their home state, which is Washington, the state of Washington in the United States, where they were putting data center after data center. They let the VAT or sales tax exemptions go, stopped immediately, no more. They didn't do another one, you know. And the legislature there thought, well, you know, we're already so established. They're headquartered here. They've already built so many operations. We don't need to do this anymore. As soon as they stopped doing it, they stopped getting them, just like that. So, you know, Microsoft voted with their feet. They said, okay, the next two are going to be in Iowa, where we get this. And that's this example right here that they turned down. This is the one that Washington said we don't need to provide anything. Iowa stepped in and said, we'll take that. 1.1 million, 154 acres, 1.1 billion of capital expenditure, just 260 million on construction alone, only 84 jobs. And this is what Washington said, well, 84 jobs, that's nothing. Let's just ignore the 1.1 million billion capital expenditure. And the fact of the matter is, incentives were critical. They solved locally the infrastructure issues. One of the issues was water for cooling and fire suppression. They did that. They built that, but they built it with the idea in mind that we won't build it just for Microsoft. Of course not. We're going to build it for this entire business park. And we'll attract many more data centers or other companies by putting in this extraordinarily robust infrastructure to support this project, but many thereafter. And they provided the sales tax exemptions. And in other places said, well, you're taking money away. Well, this is new money. This project didn't exist before. We didn't have those sales taxes before. We're not taking it away. This is additive. But we generated another 9.4 million in property taxes on the real property, on the construction itself, on the building itself. So yes, they didn't get the sales tax, but they got 9.4 million in property tax, you know, every year. And they have 84 high-paying jobs, and they got the construction project for $1 billion project that constantly is building and constantly adding. So the net value was enormous to the community, and they didn't give away something they already had. This was all new. I want to get a little bit into the talent issue. Again, as I said, it has to be scalable and sustainable. They want the IT staff. They want application developers. They want database administrators coming out of the technical colleges or from other operations. They can feel secure. They can add them and not be poached by others, that there isn't some finite number of them, that they're all sharing and driving up the cost where they're constantly going across the street for a new job. And they want some support and maintenance locally. That's the ecosystem that I spoke of. They want to be able to outsource this to the local markets, so then all their employees, that's much more of a trend, not just in data centers, but in all industry. And I put this graph here from a Guild survey we recently have, just to talk about what that means. And the one that got whited out here is, the largest bar is, I can get it locally, it's already there. If I can't get it there, the next most important thing is that the technical college locally is producing them on a regular basis. After that, I can get them from the outside world. So these are the things that they're really looking at. I talk a little bit about the latency issue because this comes up, and for some of my colleagues' projects, eBay being one of them, this is how they make their decisions. It's so important on those trades and on those transactions, at least to them, that there is no delay at all. It wouldn't even be perceptible for a human, but it is perceptible in the trade. So they have very specific connections between their largest markets and their largest corporate locations. For an operation like this, they have to be extraordinarily geographically close to the customer. Now, there are lots of projects out there that have very low latency criteria. And I list some of them here. You know, the virtual workspace, augmented reality, which will become more and more important for entertainment in the gaming world, immersive cloud-based gaming, for example. But there are many, many more that they're not important in, and that's important to know as well. But those that are, they're going to want to be next door. And I think for the case of Iceland, you can kind of forget about those, at least with today's technology. Those are going to go where they're going to go, and they'll pay the price for it. They'll pay higher power for it. They'll be in riskier areas for it. But I think for these, where the latency isn't the driving issue, those are the ones where Iceland will be much more successful. And there are lots and lots of those. There's so much happening in the cloud these days where it doesn't matter so much to me that downloading that song took 2 seconds instead of 1, you know. It doesn't matter too much to me that my photos take 5 seconds instead of 3. You know, I don't care about that, and most customers don't. And there's lots and lots of applications like this that have massive storage requirements where, you know, the almost imperceptible link between, let's say, Reykjavik and Los Angeles, nobody will really even notice it that much. And there are more and more that are happening in the Internet of Things at the industrial level where this will not be a big deal at all. So, and I note at the bottom, you know, how long some of these things take, you know, less than 60 milliseconds round trip between London and New York. You know, for trading, this may be a big deal. For everything else, it's not a deal at all. Okay, so we've gone through the process in general. We've talked about the data center process specifically, how it works, and now let's talk about Iceland. Some of this you've already heard. And I think there is a lot of good news for Iceland, which you should know because you already are being successful. First and foremost is their power situation is pretty much spectacular on a world basis. It's plentiful, it's cheap, it's sustainable, it's green. It has, you know, everything that I said that companies should be looking for, you have it. And you can do long-term contracts here. So you can take away the issue of predictability for the right client. So right out of the gate, you have something that they want that puts you already into a short list of others who can compete with you on that. You have the cool temperatures, and they're stable. You don't have giant fluctuations in temperature from summer to winter. You may not like that so much personally, but the data center love it. You know, that's exactly what they're looking for. Don't even maybe not even have to have an air conditioning unit, or if they do, it's rarely runs. You have experience. You have the ecosystem. You already have successful operations running. They can look at it and say, I'm not a pioneer. Very few companies want to be a pioneer. We have a saying in the United States, there are a lot of dead pioneers with arrows in their back lying on the plains, that you don't want to be the first in, particularly if you're spending $1 billion. So you don't have to be the first in here. There's experience here. You constantly are improving your connectivity to the mainland in Europe and to North America. The cables are getting better and better, more and more reliable, more and more redundancy in the cabling network. So even the latency issue is starting to disappear. You are committed to data privacy, made that commitment known. And you have pretty good incentives and corporate tax structure. You've reduced the real estate taxes, and you have VAT exclusions. So the initial screening criteria that I talked about, you don't have it. You have already solved that issue. However, there are challenges. First and foremost is the perception of risk, and I'm going to keep using the word perception. You may say, well, this was really not a problem. You know that, the rest of the world does not know that. They assume the worst. I mean, the media coverage of the volcano it pretty much looked like the world was going to end, maybe in the next 10 minutes, because there was certainly a lot of steam, I mean, that was the perception, and the media fed that, and it really fed that this idea that this is a risky place. I know that that's not true, but the rest of the world assumes that it's true. So you already start from behind the 8 ball that people assume that is, the earth is shaking there. There's lava flowing everywhere. You have to step over it. The lava field running through my data center. This is the perception that people have that has to be overcome. And once that image is in people's heads, it's tough to get it out. This is one that I experienced as well, and it may be some truth, but some perception, is slow project implementation. It takes a lot to get things done here. I ran into this myself on the silicon projects here, that when we wanted to change the zoning and we needed to get permitting, sometimes for maybe some dangerous chemicals, this was going to take a lot of effort. And that was adding up to millions and millions and millions of dollars of time lost to get this process up and running. We didn't want these delays, and the information wasn't clear or consistent, from one person to the next. There was not one voice being spoken on how this would be done. Everybody seemed to have their own little center of power around that, and nobody was clear around this. This is perhaps changed or changing, but the perception remains that this is, now you're not alone in this. I would say most of Europe is like this, but this is the perception that you're laden with. The latency issue, it's very far away. First decision, particularly if it's not a very skilled person leading the project, is that it's not even on the same continent. How can I possibly do this? It's too far away. Now we know that for most projects, this is completely not an issue, but the perception will be that it's too long. The data has to travel too many miles, which is nonsense, but that's what the thought will be. Now this next one is really kind of disturbing to me, and I put in italics, lingering perception. And the reason I say that, the lingering perception of high VAT in servers, is I went on to do, before I got here, a screening to look for the data, as if I'm doing a data center location and I'm looking at Iceland. I knew, because I asked the question, that this exemption had been passed, but I could not find it. The only information I could find on the internet is that it was still being debated and it was still in place. So I didn't just look at the first screen in Google, I looked at a couple of screens. I went out 3 deep, and nobody goes 3 deep in Google, right? The next 2,000 pages have never been seen by anybody, right? In fact, they're just blank, I'm sure. But the lingering perception is because you can't find it. So the message isn't out there yet. The negative message is what remains on the search. And that's how this is done these days. Now, if they did the next step and they followed up with you, you would say, of course, there's an exemption. But the initial search that is done often in these things has nothing to do with you. You'll never know that it's happening. There are probably 100 location projects looking at Iceland right now that you will never know about. And you're screened out before you even knew that it existed. And they find things like this. Well, 25% tax on servers? No way, even though it's not true. So there's work to be done there. And the perception that it's a small IT market. Oh, I'll go there and I won't be able to get anybody. Everybody's competing for the same 100 people. So these are these perceptions. So if you notice that all of the things that I've listed here are really perceptual issues as opposed to actual issues. But in the world of corporate decision-making, perception and reality are the same thing. They don't care. So this slide talks about that it is really important that you take control of this information. Nobody else is going to control it for you. And you keep in mind that what the companies that are looking at you are trying to do is get rid of you so they don't have to think about it anymore. They only want to look at the optimal locations. So you are responsible for getting that information, those facts, readily available. When that Google search is done, the first thing that comes up is the brilliancy of the market here, not that you're still debating something that was debated 2 or 3 years ago. It is developed and it's maintained daily. It's clear, it's factual, it's up to the minute, it's easy to get to, it's a portal that I can get to everything I need from one place, and it's professionally looking and produced. Remember, this is the IT world. If they're interacting with you on the internet, they expect you to be looked and feel as professional as they are. So it's very, very important in the decision factor that your first interface with them is clean, fast, and professional. Here's what they expect. Here's what I expect. First and foremost, the economic development or investment promotion people that we'll be dealing with, and that's who you are dealing with from the very beginning. The first thing is that they know what they're talking about and they can get me the information I need. Preferably, I already have that information from the portal that they've created, and I don't need much. But anything I ask, they have the market intelligence that I'm looking for. And when I customize it, they're ready to go. They just don't say, here's our brochure. They customize it and they have a good approach. And it's there. They're constantly responsive. I have one person that is a manager I'm talking to, one person I can trust, who's going to manage through the process from the day I ask question number 1 to the day we shake hands and put a shovel in the ground. That person is there from the beginning to the end. And they manage all of the relationships. They know everybody. They coordinate everybody. They're not passing you on. The kiss of death is that you find out they don't know anything about the industry and they don't know anybody. So I know that's a symbol of how difficult business is going to be to conduct in this area. Even if it's not true, that's the assumption I'm going to take away. The incentives are there, they're relevant, and they're easy to explain, and I understand the benefits of them. I can get the technical assistance I require. If I need to have experts from the electric power utility, they're provided. If I need to have experts from the telecom industry, they're provided. I need to have HR, recruiting experts, they're provided. The technical assistance is readily available. This last point I mentioned earlier, confidentiality. You can keep your mouth shut. These projects are confidential, almost all of them. I shared some examples earlier. Some people, there are some countries in Europe that I have to deal with. They say, well, if you don't tell me who they are, I'm not going to help you. And I said, I can't. No, the only people who know are the C-suite and me. This is it. This has to be kept this way. You have to trust us. And they say, well, we won't. It's our government rule. We don't know who it is. We don't cooperate. And I said, well, that's fatal. You're done. And they say, we don't care. We'd rather know than get the project. And I say, well, okay, that's a big problem for you, but okay. So you have to understand at the government and the policy level that this kind of business is done confidentially. Now you get down further on, they'll sign memorandum, they'll sign non-disclosures, and they'll have a few people in on the project because you have to allow the area to do its due diligence on the company, of course, but not in the beginning. That'll be later on. So you have to be able to maintain confidentiality. I've had projects I'll share a little story. This was not the data center industry. This happened to be for the company Bridgestone. And it was a $1 billion investment. We were in some smaller cities, and the city leaders were sitting around a small table like this. We were to the point, they were shortlisted down to the final three, had to tell them who it is. They had to sign something, right? And they were willing to do that. We mentioned many times before, during, and after this meeting that the breach of confidentiality is fatal. We left, 2 days later, I look, and there it is on the front page of their newspaper. Bridgestone visits, chooses our town as finalist. One of those people around the table was the owner and the publisher of the newspaper, and decided this was a very good story. They were done. They were finished at that point. Bridgestone said, not only for this project, but never, ever. We will remember. We have long memories. So in any case, when that happens, it is often fatal. And the final point, and not the least important point, is aftercare. And this is an important point, is that once, it's one thing to be able to get the date. It's another thing to be able to sustain a marriage. And aftercare is very important, and this is what I look for as a site selector. I hear the information that the service providers and the government provide me, and I assume that's all marketing brochures. They're just trying to sell me a car. They're giving me the best possible information. Who does tell me the truth are the other companies. And that's where I go for my information. I talk to all the other companies and how is it to run. They can give me the technical details of what it's like to run the operation, but they also can tell me what it's like to run a business there. Did they follow through with what they said they're going to do? When you wanted to expand or you needed a change in the traffic patterns, were they there to help you? No. Once we got here, they just disappeared. They were on to the next one, And then I realized, when you make an investment like this, of course, you hope that it's not the last investment you're going to make there. You want to continue to expand and add to this operation. And if they can't help me in the future, then what good are they? So the aftercare is an important selection point. Okay, so with that, I'll open it up to questions. And I think what I'll do at this point, you can ask the question in Icelandic or English. And I think if this is on, if it's Icelandic, I can understand it.
Yes, good day. My name is Thorvaldur Sigurðsson. Good day. My name is Thorvaldur Sigurðsson. I'm an independent IT consulting expert here in Iceland. And I want to start to applaud Landsvirkjun and DCI Iceland for having this morning breakfast. The breakfast was very good, thank you. I would like to get your external view, because most of us here are Icelanders. And we, as you mentioned, don't see the volcanoes as a problem, but the perception is a problem. I wanted to ask you two points here. If you would rank Iceland from 1 to 5, 5 being no problem, what would you rank Iceland as a natural disaster area? And the second thing is related to data connectivity. There is also a perception, wrong or right, that data connectivity is a monopoly in Iceland. And I'm sure that Faris would want to comment on that on the panel, but there is a perception, there's a monopoly on data connectivity, and therefore that is a negative point for Iceland. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the question, I think you all heard it, is one was natural disaster ranking, and two was whether or not the monopoly on data connectivity is a problem, or is at least a problem perceptually. Honestly, both are a problem. Otherwise, you wouldn't have asked the question. But they're both manageable problems. It depends on the customer, but I would say most likely if you add all natural disasters up, and temperature can be a natural disaster too, right? Too hot can be an absolute disaster. Too cold or too much ice or too much snow can be a disaster. I would say coming out of the box, we would say it's probably a problem. But you have to manage it. This will get into a strategy that Iceland will have to take on to take a problem head on. You can't run from the fact. Everybody can see the seismic charts, right? Everybody can see the history there. But you can talk about how to manage it and what the downtime really was. Start dealing in the world of facts, not in perceptions and emotions, right? So you have facts around how many days were lost. 0, right? Or 1, I mean, you look at a place in the United States that supposedly has good weather and good business, Dallas, they lose so many days every year, in the summer and in the winter to weather. Tornadoes, electrical storms, ice storms, they have all of it. So they'll lose, I would bet, more days by far than Reykjavik loses. And that's the kind of comparison you need to do. You need to have the facts readily available. Don't make people guess. They'll assume the worst. They'll assume that people are running screaming from lava every day. And that, well, I've only lost 2 children to the volcano, So the perception out of the box will be poor, but I think it's manageable by showing where exactly it occurs. And you're going to have to take this issue on head on. And a connectivity issue, most of the world is in the same boat. In the United States, we like to believe that we don't have a monopoly. The fact is that the monopoly is everywhere, and particularly in data and telecom. Some areas you go to, you have choice. Some areas they say you have choice, but you have no choice in that particular neighborhood. There's one provider in this neighborhood, one provider in this neighborhood, one provider in that neighborhood. Sometimes you have choice, sometimes you don't. All things considered, you would like to have that choice. But at the end of the day, I'm looking at cost, reliability, bandwidth. Can I get the bandwidth I want? If I can get all those things at a reliable cost, and I do my due diligence and I talk to companies, I say no problem. But then again, I've done work all over the world, as many of my colleagues have. We're used to this, electric power or data being a monopoly, government provided. Others will not be so much, and you just have to deal with that. But it's the same answer. You have to deal with it head on. Yes, we have one provider, but here's the facts about our reliability. Here's the facts about the sustainability and depth of our bandwidth and what it's going to cost you at the end of the day. Now, if you fall down on the cost, then you have a problem. But assuming you don't, then you can manage that. You can manage that perception. Okay? Yes.
My name is Kjetil Sigurjónsson. I want to ask you if we should, when attracting data center investment in Iceland, should we focus on some special kind of industry or services to come? Should we skip thinking of the big companies like Facebook or Google? Should we look very broad, or, as I say, should we focus on a special industry, special services to come to Iceland?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't think I have a satisfactory answer for you on the specialty, because even within the same company, they may have different requirements. As I said, every project is different, and we can use an example like a Facebook or Google or Apple, large data centers, many of them. They may have operations that are very latency critical, and those you cannot focus on. But they may have others where they're just doing storage. Within the same company, I assume they have both. Undoubtedly, they have both. So it's pretty hard to say that you would screen out a company. So I think you can probably not focus And even now, I don't even know if this is true. I would say in the financial world, where there's a lot of trading going on, you could say, well, if it's a Wall Street company, for example, or a London-based company that is doing a lot of trading, we won't do well in that. But they may have other storage requirements as well. So if you have the Royal Bank of Scotland, or you have the Bank of America or Bank of New York, they have many, many needs for data, and will have continuing needs for data. And some of it will be perfectly fine to store here. Others they would never take out of the country. So it's really hard to answer that without knowing more. Should we be looking at small? Should we be looking at third-party providers only? I really don't have a good answer. I would say long-term, I don't see any reason why you can't get things that can leave a national border, and some can't. And so you just have to do your homework on that. But it's difficult at this stage of your strategy, to the extent that I understand it, to make that kind of distinction. You can make the strategy needs to begin with all of the facts around operating in general, what you're good at, before, and then let the market sort out who's going to find you.
Jæja, þetta var virkilega áhugavert og vil ég núna bjóða þeim Björgvini Skúla Sigurðssyni frá Landsvirkjun, Halldóri Þorkelssyni, framkvæmdastjóra hjá PwC, Guðbrand R. Sigurðsson, framkvæmdastjóra sölu og markaðsins hjá Opnum Kerfum, og Örn Orrason, yfirmaður sölu og viðskiptaþróunar hjá Farice. Velkomna í panel. Mér langaði aðeins að segja ykkur svona bakgrunna þessar einstaklinga. Hann Björgvin Skúli, sem ég kynnti hér áður og talaði, hann með meistar á doktorsprófi í verkfræði og stjórnun frá Stanford Háskóla og CS-gráði í véla- og iðnaðarverkfræði frá Háskóla Íslands. En áður en að Björgvin gekk til liðs við Landsvirkjun var hann framkvæmdastjóri hjá Deutsche Bank í London og starfaði þar áður hjá Lehman Brothers. Björgvin var einn stofnenda hugbúnaðar fyrirtækisins Mentis. Halldór Þorkelsson, sem kemur frá PwC, útskrifast sem lögfræðingur frá Háskóla Íslands og hann hefur veitt fyrirtækja ráðgjöf PwC forstöðu frá 2004, en áður en að Halldór gekk í raðir PwC gegndi hann sérfræðistörfum hjá fjármálaráðuneytinu. Og Guðbrandur, sem framkvæmdastjóri sölu og markaðsviðs hjá Opnum Kerfum, hann hefur síðustu 3 árin verið í ýmiss konar gagnaversþjónustu sem orðin fyrirferðarmeiri starfsemi hjá Opnum Kerfum, og hefur Guðbrandur tekið virkan þátt í vegferð fyrirtækisins að vera leiðandi þjónustuaðili fyrir gagnaversiðnaðinn á Íslandi. Hann situr einnig í stjórn DCI hópsins hjá samtökum iðnaðarins. Og Örn Orrason, yfirmaður sölu og viðskiptaþróunar hjá Farice, hann sem sagt menntaður rafmagnsverkfræðingur og með MBA-gráðu, og hann hefur starfað að fjarskiptum undanfarin 20 ár og komið að Farice verkefnum frá upphafi með ýmsum hætti, en hefur alfarið starfað hjá Farice síðustu 5 árin. Og ég ætla bara að biðja ykkur að gefa þessum einstaklingum gott klapp. Mér langar að beina fyrstu spurninguna til þín, Björgvin, og spyrja þig, hver aðkoma Landsvirkjunar að staðarvalsferlinu?
Landsvirkjun náttúrulega fyrirtæki sem selur rafmagn. Það það sem við gerum. Við seljum ekki annað, við seljum ekki annars konar þjónustu heldur en það. En við höfum eins og verið í þessu ferli sérstaklega hvað var það gagnaver, þá höfum við séð það betur og betur að okkur ber að halda utanum og vera vissum að fleiri þræðir koma saman. Því að öðruvísi, þið sáuð öll boxin sem hann að sýna hérna, hann fyll. Við eigum öll, það eru aðrir aðilar sem eiga heima í þessum boxum og Landsvirkjun kemur ljós. Við þurfum að treysta á að þessi box séu uppfyllt og þessi aðilar sem klári það sem þarf að gera í þessum boxum. Að sumuleyti það þannig að þessir aðilar kannski viti ekki af mikilvægi sínu í ferlinu, þannig að við höfum þá lagt á það heilmikla áherslu undanfarin ár að fara út til þessar aðila til þess að útskýra fyrir þeim að þeir séu partur af öllu þessu púsli sko, við getum ekki veitt endurskoðunarþjónustu, en við þurfum að treysta á það endurskoðendur, þeir séu meðvitaðir sinn part í þessu spili. Og það líka þannig að þegar þið heyrið mann eins og Phil tala, sko, hann ekkert hérna af einhverju góðgerðarstarfi. Þetta ansi grimmur bransi og samkeppni sem í þessum bransa sem hann í. Þannig að þegar við vitum það eins og hann sagði sjálfur, það eru aðilar að skoða Ísland og við vitum ekkert af því. Það eru aðilar sem koma hér og spurja okkur kurteislegra spurninga eins og Phil, en ef hann fær ekki svörin sem hann vill, þá fer hann og kemur ekkert aftur og hann útskýrir ekkert fyrir okkur af hverju það var. Það getur verið bara við götuðum á einhverjum svörum varðandi, ég veit ekki hvað, einmitt útskýring á því bara hvernig jarðskjálftavirkni sé á Íslandi og menn segja bara að þetta reddast. Sko, ef þú segir svona, þetta reddast, þá kemur Phil aldrei aftur. Það svarið sem að gerir það að verkum að við dettum út af listunum. Þannig að ég myndi kannski segja að markmið okkar með og aðkoma þessu stafvæðsferli að bara passa það að við séum ekki krossuð út úr ferlinu og við komumst inn á þennan loka lista sem þau eru að tala um. Og hvað verða samvinnu okkar við aðra, þá þetta bara þannig að við hjá Landsvirkjun vitum talsvert mörg verkefni sem að hafa verið að skoða Ísland alvarlega. Við erum bara undir trúnaðar ákvæðum það. Við megum ekkert segja frá því. Þess heyrið bara áhersluna á trúnað sem hann leggur á hann Phil. Þannig að við þurfum líka að treysta því þegar við spurjum fólk að það skilji að við erum að spurja af ástæðu. Við treystum því að fólk vinni sína vinnu bara faglega og vel, ekkert í neinum góðgerðarstarfi, bara út af því að það eru hagsmunir okkar allra að við getum staðið við þetta og byggt upp hóp af fólki sem skilur og vinnur saman að þessum málum sem eru gagnaðir. Ef það svara fyrir spurningunni.
Já, heldur betur. En þá kemur upp önnur spurning og ég ætla að beina til þín, Halldór. Hver ykkar reynsla af samskiptum við erlenda aðila sem hafa ráðgert fjárfestingar hér á landi?
Já, við höfum komið að þessum verkefnum eins og Phil var að lýsa, það að segja þar sem verið að fara í gegnum þennan staðarvalprósess, komið að því að taka saman greina og setja saman þessar upplýsingar sem verið að afla, afskaplega lærdómsrík ferli og afskaplega öguð ferli. Við höfum jafnframt verið að aðstoða aðala sem hafa verið að kynna sig út á erlendum markaði, þar að segja verið með ákveðna staði hér sem þeir vilja svona auglýsa út á við og þetta hefur við gert í gegnum okkar erlenda tengslanett og það hefur verið afskaplega gagnlegt og fróðlegt að sjá hvernig þessi grimma samkeppni kristallast þar. Eins og þessi spurning sem kom hérna fyrr, þetta með náttúruvána, þetta afskaplega auðveldlega spilað upp í allri samkeppni. Það var til að mynda einn af okkar umbjóðendur sem lýsti því að hann kom á svona, getum við sagt, samkomið þar sem var verið að kynna þessa kosti sem til var í heiminum og þar var einn hópurinn sem að mætti í einfallega bara stuttarmabólum með Ísland sem slógan og svo var bara svoleiðis glóandi hraun leðjana að sko ryðja sér yfir allt og ekkert. Þannig að þetta afskaplega auðvelt að slá þessu fram með þessum hætti. En svona í þriðja stað eru við síðan með kúnna bara innan okkar viðbanda sem eru með beinum og óbeinum hætti í þessum bransa. Þannig að við höfum haft svona nokkuð margs konar aðkoma að þessu.
Já, takk fyrir þetta. En þá langar mig kannski að spyrja þig, Örn, frá Farice. Hvernig eru þið að upplifa að vinna með þessum erlendu stórfyrirtækjum sem eru að skoða Ísland? Hvernig eru vinnubrögð þeirra og þarfir að ykkar mati?
Já, þú ert að tala um erlend stórfyrirtæki sem ekki komin.
Já.
Við höfum ekki mikið verið að vinna með þeim, satt að segja.
Nei.
Það sem maður undrast oft hvað maður heyrir seint af þeim í ferlinu, þetta allt confidential upplýsingar.
Auðvitað.
Og þá ekkert verið að bladra í mann, sko. Ég vil þótt að félagar mínir hjá Landsvirkjun vita eitthvað, þá veit ég ekkert. En svo vill oft, sko, fjarskiptin eru mikilvæg og verðin eru mikilvæg, þess vegna undrast maður okkur það ekki komað að þeim punkti fyrr ferlinu. En við vinnum náttúrulega náum með núverandi kúnnum og það fullt af fyrirspurnum í gangi, það fullt af verðtilboðum hérna úti í dag og það er eitt bara jákvætt, menn spyrjum verð og menn treysta greinilega okkar infrastruktúr, myndi ég segja. Fáum stundum auðvitað þær athugasemdir og við sem aðeins svo dýrir, það er eðlilegt. Menn að reyna að fá verðin lægri. En við erum alveg fullkomlega meðvitaðir það að við erum að keppa við önnur lönd. Þannig að við sitjum ekki hér rólegir monopólistar, eins og stundum sagt, og gefum bara þau verð út sem okkur þóknast. Við erum stöðugt að reyna að finna það verð sem að viðskiptavinurinn er sáttur. Og það er ekki vandamáli við að koma til Íslands, heldur eitthvað annað.
En takk fyrir þetta. Guðbrandur, nú situr þú hér fyrir hönd opinna kerfa. Þið eru öflugir í þessum iðnaði og langar mig aðeins að heyra frá þér, ef við berum bara saman kröfur erlendra viðskiptavina við þá innlendu. Hvernig hafið þið hjá opnum kerfum brugðist við þessu? Kannski aðeins að heyra svona ykkar reynslu. Ég hef heyrt að þið eru með stóra viðskiptavini sem hafa verið að auka við þjónustu hjá ykkur á undanfarnum árum.
Það er rétt. Í grunninn er þjónusta við erlenda aðila í gagnaveriðnaðinum og innlenda aðila, hún er mjög keimlík. Íslenskir viðskiptavinir gera alveg sömu kröfur og þessi erlenda aðilar sem við erum að þjónusta. En magnið af búnaði og lausnum er náttúrulega allt annað. Getur verið kannski 10-20-falt á við það sem við erum að horfa á fyrir innlenda starfsemi. En það sem við erum að þjónusta núna stóra viðskiptavini sem er að upplifa Ísland sem svona gríðarlega er að upplifa mjög góða þjónustu á Íslandi og hafa verið að hrósa Íslandi, ekki bara okkur heldur verktökum og gagnavers aðilum fyrir bara mjög responsív þjónustu og eru að flýta ferlinu að koma til Íslands og er að vaksa gríðarlega hjá okkur. Og þarna eru viðskiptavinir eins og BMF til dæmis sem við erum að þjónusta og þeir hafa verið að ætla að vaksa mjög mikið og eru að skoða ofurtölu, eru með ofurtölurekstur á Íslandi og eru að skoða síðan aðrar lausnir og koma með aðrar lausnir til Íslands.
Takk fyrir þetta. I wanted to talk to you in English, Philip, and ask you one question. You mentioned before some critical points that are necessary for Iceland to have to compete on this market of site selection. And I was wondering if you could pinpoint one or two of the most important items that could be improved in the short term or long term in order to make Iceland an even more attractive option. If you could choose just like two things that we could really improve in when it comes to site selection.
So we can break these two things into categories. One, most people will go to first is, policy. What can we change, right? How do we make this better? But the other one is perception. And I think I take perception first. You have, as you heard here from the other panel members, but also in my presentation, the critical elements for data center, the most critical elements are here in competitive, but it's not well known, right? So you mentioned this story of Sweden, out there enforce negative marketing, which I think is poor taste, but it probably was effective. But the point is they were marketing, right? And they were marketing their advantages and your disadvantages. And when I do the search around data centers and start to get information on Iceland, the information is not robust and it's not easy to find. And I would bet many, if not most, of the largest customers that should be attracted to Iceland in Europe and North America don't know very much about you. And because of that, they assume the worst. So your marketing effort and the comparison, taking an aggressive, proactive approach on comparing yourself to others, including Sweden, to knock them back a few steps, I think is very, very important. And it has to be fact-based and it has to follow the process of the decision that the company would make. So I would say, take advantage of your advantages now and take an aggressive stance. Don't expect people to come and find you. You have to go looking for them and make sure they have the facts.
But in the matters of competitiveness, I'm wondering, because we hear this a lot, that we have to do comparison, we have to offer the same thing as the best one does if you want to be a leader in an industry. But I wonder if me and Björgvin came to you, he is from the UK, I'm from Iceland, and we have similar offers, which one would you
Well,
do business
you know,
with?
first of all, are they truly similar offers? That's the first thing I'd have to understand. Are the costs the same? And I can tell you, I'm certain they are not between the UK and Iceland. But your question is around known quantity, right? And the perception of risk. And one can say, well, the UK are a known quantity and it's likely low risk. I'll make that decision because I won't get fired for making that decision, you know, even if it's more costly. So that's the perception you're going to have to proactively try to change. But there are some other things that you can change that I think are not too difficult to do. One is, as I mentioned, taking on the process of implementation, speed to market. This is something that is completely in your hands. You know, this is not an accident of geography or physical issue. This is an issue of choice. And you can make the other choice is which we are going to execute quickly. We are going to give you one window, one person, they're going to take you through the process, and we'll have there will be no holdups. You know, your project, your data center comes in, you go to the top of the pile. On permitting, on licensing, on everything else. There's no excuse to do anything else. This is an investment in your economy, and you're trying strategically to make this an industry of choice and a location of choice for that industry. This is something within your control that you can do. And the other game that has to be played, and we can all complain about this, we don't like it, but it is the game of incentives.
Yes.
And the rest of the world is playing this. I hear these complaints all over the world. This is not a free market. This is corporate welfare. Well, you know, the fact of the matter is, this is how the game is played. These are the rules of the game. You know, you can complain about the game, but it is the game. And then you have to look at this, and the public, and certainly the media, don't often understand that. They feel that this is taking away something that was already there. This is all new. This didn't exist before. You're getting something, but you're giving some of that back to the company. But as long as that sort of policy is based on the incremental add and not taking away, then this is all additive. And that kind of policy thinking needs to take place. What is the economic impact and what is the return on investment for Iceland? Let's take a percentage of that. And if we need to offset the UK because of this perception of risk, we know what we have to do. So you have to do the math and do the modeling ahead of time. Again, these are two things that are in your control.
Very good point. Björgvin, hvað getum við gert hér á landi til þess að búa gagnaverum enn ákjósanlegra umhverfi að þínu mati?
Sko, ég held að sem betur fer að þá sé hægt að hlusta hérna og Phil og ímynda sér sko hvað við eigum gott tækifæri hérna í höndunum. Ég meina, hann að lýsa því sem að að mörguleyti auðvelt að laga. Náttúrulega markaðssetning eitt sem við þurfum að markaðsetta Ísland betur. Hann bendir réttilega á það að við ímyndum okkur að fólk viti margt Ísland, sko, það bara ekki þannig. En það tiltölulega einfalt að laga það sem betur fer. Það líka varðandi sem sagt samvinnu innanlands. Við eigum tækifæri hérna á Íslandi með þessum stuttu boðleiðum sem eru hérna til þess að ná mjög góðum árangri. Ég meina, hugsa ykkur, hann að benda það sé sko slow project implementation á Íslandi. Ég held að það ekki bara fréttir fyrir Íslendingar sem haldi að menn bretti hér bermanda bara gangi í verkin. Hér kemur maður og segir, heyrðu, þetta gengur alltaf hægt hjá okkur. Ég held að við getum gert miklu betur sem betur fer sko. Þannig að ég held að til þess að grípa þetta betur að þá munum við vinna bara betur saman. Þessir hagsmunaaðilar, vegna þess að við eigum öll, langflesti sem hér ímyndaði með sko hagsmuni af því að þetta bara gangi betur. Það enginn að biðja fólk hérna að standa í einhverju góðgerðarstarfsemi, alls ekki, sannarlega ekki Landsvirkjun. Við ætlum okkur að selja rafmagn, aðrir ætla sér að selja þjónustu og vörur og annað slíkt. En hagsmunir okkar allar eru þegar við gerum þetta bara ennþá betur.
En hérna, þá gríp ég það og spyr þig Halldór, menn veltaði fyrir sér með gagnaversiðnaðinn hvort að hann sé einhvers staðar nálægt því sem kallaði tipping point eða hvort að hversu mörg ár við höfum í raun og veru tækifæri til að staðsetja okkur sem stóran, aktívan aðila á þessum markaði. Hvað sér þú í þessum iðnaði á Íslandi hér á næstu árum?
Já, ég held bara í framhaldi af því sem að Björgvin að segja, ég held við eigum alveg gríðarlega mikið inn í að svona samstilla vélina. Það að segja hafa svona samsiltast sína það hvernig við viljum vera viðbúin til þess að takast á við þetta tækifæri. Og ég held að það sé nú svona yfir höfuð ekki mikill ágreiningur að þetta sé sko eftirsóknarverð tækifæri fyrir okkur. En ég held að svona eitt af því sem að við klálega getum gert betur en maður svona horfið til þess, þá sé það kannski að hafa þær upplýsingar og þau gögntæk sem að jafnaði verið að leita. Eitt af því sem var afskaplega lærdómsríkt fyrir okkur fyrir nokkrum árum síðan var þegar að PwC framkvæmir reglulega það sem að heitir Cities of Opportunities. Nú veit ekki hvort þið þekkið það, en það var fyrir nokkrum árum síðan gerð sérstök greining. Þetta í rauninni bara verið að bera saman samkeppnishæfni borgarsamfélaga. Og það var gerð ein sérstök greining á borgunum hér á Norðurlöndunum og Reykjavík var þar á meðal. Þetta voru 10 yfir mælikvarðar og ef ég man rétt hæflega 60 svona undir mælikvarðar. Af þessum 60 þá fundust ekki gögnum rétt 7 fyrir Reykjavík, sem var eina borgin af þessum norrænu borgum sem bara hreinlega fundust engin gögnum. Þannig bara hreinlega ekki mælanleg, sem svona eitthvað til þess að læra. Síðan var annað sem var afskaplega athyglisvert að til að mynda bara á mælikvarðanum mengun, þá skoraði Reykjavík afskaplega neðarlega og þetta þótti fólki umhugsunarvert og við til að mynda sátum með borgarráð Reykjavíkur til þess að diskutera þetta og það sem að kemur í ljós þar að mælirinn sem að mældi þetta og ég veit ekki nema að gera það ennþá, hann á gatnamótum Grensásvegar og Miklubrautar og átti sem sagt að vera svona dæmigerður mælikvarði á það hvernig Reykjavík rankar svona mengunarlega sér. Þannig að það að mínu viti svona í fyrsta lagi að gögnin séu til sem að verið að bera okkur saman við önnur lönd, aðra valkosti, við eigum þau til og síðan gæði þeirra. Svona til þess að draga það saman hvað maður telur að við getum klálega svona bætt okkur í. En það eftir einhverja sælast, absolutt.
Ég bæta þessu við að því að Halldór hann tala nú ekki það en þeir hafa unnið mikið hjá okkur, fyrir okkur hjá Landsvirkjun, hjá PwC að taka saman alls upplýsingar atriði sem varða Ísland og kannski liggja ekkert fyrir. Ég meina, ef þið eru spurð hvað margir alþjóðlegir skólar á Íslandi eða í Reykjavík, ég ekki sem að það séu margir sem að myndu vita að þeir eru 2. Sem að margir myndu vita að það kennt á ensku í þessu skólum og hvers slags setup það ef að fólk vil koma hér með fjölskyldu sína og setja stað á Íslandi. En upplýsingar glæpatíðni, upplýsingar flugbrautir til dæmis, flugleiðir flugvélar sem að Phil kom nú inn á það. Þetta eru atriði sem að kannski dettur í hug eða engin telur að séu þess eitthvað sem virði að taka saman. En við hins vegar fengum PwC til að aðstoða okkur við svona vinnu, þannig að þessi svona upplýsingar, allavega grunnupplýsingar, séu til staðar, en við þurfum alltaf að gera ennþá betur og hafa til reiðu á fleiri sviðum heldur en akkurat þar. Og þar náttúrulega bara að gera sem flestir leggja hönd á plóg. Hvað það var þar?
Mig langar að beina næstu spurningu til Guð.
I'd like to add one point to this, if I may. Is the data are important, for sure, but the value is critical. And that's a difference. And there are many web portals or information sites out there that provide facts, but very few. If you want to separate yourself from the competition, the way to separate it is what value does this have to the data centers? How do we compare and what is the value as an operator? What is this going to mean to me in terms of cost and speed? And overall quality of my business. Taking that data and turning it into value to the operation separates the good from the great.
Guðbrandur, Mér langar að spyrja þig vegna þess að ég er ekki alveg viss hvort við Íslendingar höfum í raun og veru myndað okkur skoðun tengt gagnaversiðnaðinum og þú kemur úr upplýsing og tækni geiranum sem að nú nýverið gerði ég mælingu þar sem að þið eru starfsgreinahópur hjá mér innan samtaka iðnaðarins og nýjustu veltutölur segja að þið velti 80 milljörðum. Það er mikil aukning.
Heildin þá mennur?
Það er heildar með hardware. 62 milljarðar tökum hardware út og það er 20% aukning á milli ára. Þetta er meiri aukning heldur en sjáum almennt í vexti hagkerfisins. Já. Og þið náttúrulega eru með ýmiss konar þjónustu hjá opnum kerfum. Hver er þín skoðun ef að ég spyrði bara sem almennur þegni Íslands, er þetta góður iðnaður? Myndirðu mæla með honum?
Klárlega ef ég horfa á þetta frá okkar sjónarhóli og hvernig okkar vegferð hefur verið undanfarin 4 ár síðan að við byrjuðum að taka þátt í þessum gagnaversiðnaði, að þá hefur það verið bara gríðarlega góður vöxtur hjá okkur og þetta er bara góður business ef ég má sletta þess. Og þú segir 20% vöxtur á veltu og það er svona sambarlegt við það sem við erum að sjá hjá okkur bara í gagnaverstengdri þjónustu. Og það er náttúrulega langt umfram það sem við erum að sjá í öðrum vexti, í öðrum sektorum. Þannig að klárlega er þetta mjög góður business til þess að vera í og við sjáum bara gríðarlega tækifæri í framtíðinu og við erum að vinna núna í mörgum stórum málum og við erum náttúrulega höldum trúnaði eins og búið að benda oft á og það er gríðarlega mikilvægt fyrir okkar viðskiptavinni að við höldum trúnaði við þá en við sjáum að framtíðin er gríðarlega björt í þessu. Það er náttúrulega fullt af hlutum sem maður betur fara og við bara tökum á því í sameiningu.
Hvað þættir eru það helst sem snúaði ykkur? Ef ég mætti bara...
Björgum var að segja það, að koma þessum upplýsingum bara á framfæri. Og ég held að Pól hafi líka talað það, að hann leitar á internetinu og finnur ekki þessar upplýsingar sem hann vantar. Þetta er allt í kollinum á örugglega öllum inni, eða flestum. En það er bara að koma í réttan funnel og funnelaði þeim út á netið á réttan hátt. Og ég held að við ættum að taka ferðamannaiðnaðinn bara til fyrirmyndar hvernig þeir gerðu þetta. Þeir fóru í Inspired by Iceland herferðina og sjáu hvað það hefur gert fyrir Ísland. Ég held að við ættum að setja sambærilega herferð að stað fyrir gagnaversiðnaðinn á Íslandi.
Mér finnst þetta með svo góðu punktu vegna þess að oft er einum iðnaði stillt upp við annan og sagt af hverju setjum við ekki bara allt okkar í sjávarútveg, við erum svo miklu sérfræðingar þar, sleppum áliðnaði, sleppum gagnaversiðnaði og mér finnst þetta með svo góðu punktu vegna þess að auðvitað viljum við hafa fjölbreytileika á Íslandi, við viljum skapa verðmæti og þegar við horfum til þess þá viljum við auðvitað blómlegan margvíslegan iðnað, en mér langaði aðeins að koma með eina spurningu sem ég fékk af því að fólk er duglegt að senda inn spurningar og af Facebook, ég ætla bara að beina sér til panelsins, þetta er svolítið áhugavert og mikil tækifæri í þessari spurningu. Þá kom athugasemd frá Ellis Hrænberg, hann segir, er virkilega engi farin að átta sig á því að þetta merkir engan hagnað hérlendis og engin ný störf hlutfallslega. Þannig að ég velti þessu upp og ég veit ekki hvort að Phil, would you like to answer this question? It's kind of like the general public is not totally convinced about the worth of the industry and...
Yes, and you can see on the face of it why somebody would say that. It's not an illogical question. I mean, people say, well, where are the jobs? But the problem with this type of thinking is that it is an either-or thinking. If we go for this, we can't do something else. If we go for data centers, we have to forget about fishing. This is, of course, nonsense. This is not an either-or. This is a both. Going after the IT world, look at the construction jobs that are being created. Look at the constant investment that is being made in these things, year in and year out. The jobs that are provided are good jobs, and it doesn't prevent you from doing all other things. It's additive to the economy. And the way to combat this type of thinking is, what is the overall add and what is the cost? Is it additive to the economy? Are we getting more value? and return on investment? If the answer is yes, it's a good thing, you know, but there's this feeling, and I think sometimes the media feed this, is that, well, if we do this, we can't do something else, which is of course nonsense.
Ég vildi aðtuga hvort það væri áhugaverðar spurningar úr sal til viðmælanda okkar svona rétt áruna við ljúkum panelnum. Myndið þú standa upp og segja okkur nafnið þitt og fyrirtæki?
Ég heiti Ágústín Þorbergsdóttir, ég vinn fyrir Navigo sem ráðgjafafyrirtæki. I have a question for Phil. It regards data protection and how important is data protection, and whether the non-agreement between the EU and the US on the safe harbor agreement will have any implications. Also, the EU increased importance on putting everything into the cloud, and in regard to the new single market, digital single market strategy, and if you see any opportunities for Iceland in that regard. Thank you.
Yes, the answer is, data privacy is critical, and I think that is one thing you do find when you do an internet search for Iceland, is that its tradition and insistence on privacy. And I think this is a marketable advantage that you should take advantage of, because it's going to end up in the cloud. This is happening, in an area that can provide assurance and security of the privacy of the data. Now we know some data will never leave national borders for national security reasons, so Iceland wouldn't be able to compete for that, but a lot of other data, less sensitive, whether it's demographic data from the government or whether it's corporate storage and data, this is can go anywhere in the world, but they want to know that it's secure and secure from the government. So the short answer is absolutely critical, and it can be an advantage for Iceland.
Thank you.
Góðan daginn, Oddur Ragnar heiti ég og bæjarfulltrúi á sveitarfélaginu Vogum og starfa líka í rekstrarlausnasviði Advania. Mér langar til að vita í sambandi við kostnað þessara fyrirtækja og sem sagt uppbygginguna í dreifikerfinu hvað var til þessara gagnavera. Advania og rekur stór gagnaver sem dreifð eiginlega á Reykjaneslínu söður eftir. Skiptir máli ef við spáum í staðsetningu á gagnaverum til frambúðar og kannski þegar sveitarfélög að reyna að hafa sig frammi það bjóða staðsetningu fyrir svona gagnaver, hvort að við séum nálægt sem sagt dreifikerfi Landsnets eða hugsunin að sala til gagnavera á rafmagni sé í gegnum orkuveitur sveitarfélagana eða lykilatriðið að vera nálægt aðal dreifikerfi Landsnets og virkjunar?
Já, kannski best að ég svara þessari spurningu til þess að útskýra aðeins hvernig orkumarkaðurinn byggður upp. Þá það þannig að orkufyrirtækin eins og Landsvirkjun við vinnum og framleiðum rafmagn og afhendum þau síðan bara rétt hjá virkjuninni hjá okkur. Þar síðan tekum við fyrirtæki sem heitir Landsnet og það sér að flytja rafmagnið síðan á þann stað sem það á að nota það skiptið. Þannig að því leyti Landsnet í raun að reka nokkurs konar þjóðvegakerfi og síðan þegar þú ert komin út á þjóðveginum þá dettur inn í dreifikerfi innan mismunandi bæjarfélaga og sveitarfélaga. Þannig að þá ertu komin inn í bara botlanga og götur og innan þess sveitarfélags. Þannig að fyrir orkufrekan iðnað almennt og gagnaver engin undantekning þar, þá verða þau að vera staðsett nálægt hraðbrautunum, nálægt stofnæðum í flutningskerfi rafmagns, því að þú kemur ekki stórum flutningabílum fyrir í smáum götum, bara eins og við sjáum í miðbæ Reykjavíkur. Rúturnar bara passa ekki í göturnar. Þannig að það hefur mikið að segja að vera nálægt þessum tengipunktum, já, er stuttasvarið. Auðvitað náttúrulega síðan fer eftir því hversu stór starfsemin hversu nálægt þú þarft að vera nákvæmlega stofnæðinni og hvort þú getur verið aðeins lengra frá heldur en bókstaflega við hliðina á afreininni af hraðbrautinni. En ég vona þetta kannski svari spurningunni, en þið heyri náttúrulega sko að öryggi í afhendingu rafmagns mjög mikilvægur fyrir gagnaver. Þau geta ekkert orðið rafmagnslaus, þá bara engin þjónusta af þeim og viðskiptavinir erlendis ekkert að spurja hvernig stóð á því að það ekki þjónusta. Þeir segja bara að það engin þjónusta og það verður allt brjálað. Þá eins gott að vera búin að undirbúa sig undir það vel og lágmarka þá áhættu að svoleiðis laga gerist í rekturinn.
I wanted to ask you, Phil, one question before we end the session, and that is about my belief that Iceland really can play a major role in the industry of data centers. But I'm wondering, there's always a window of opportunity where you can decide on what you're gonna do, make the perfect marketing strategy, and go out. What do you say? How many years or months do we have to?
Well, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm also going to answer a little bit of the question that was asked before you. I'll first start with yours. The first part of the answer is the window doesn't stay open forever. Now, does this mean that data centers are a flash in the pan? Of course not. It's only going to get larger, but your competition is closing in, right? And there are locations around the world that are focusing on data centers. They have their marketing going, and they're trying to attract as much as possible, and you can't wait. So the opportunity isn't so much closing because the industry is going away. It's because your ability to become a player will and compete with all the others will only last so long. Is it months? No, but it's I would say you have no time to waste at all. You should start today, and know that you'll take time to build up your marketing materials, your data, your value add, your comparisons, and the infrastructure and policy changes that need to be made in order to do it. Some of these things will take time, so you need to start on it. But I think the industry looks pretty good for the foreseeable future for Iceland, but your competitors are all over it and will continue to be so, so you have no time to waste. Now, I want to add on to something, the point you just made around site selection for the data centers. It is critical to be near the big pipes. Of course, the substation itself is the critical part of it, and as I mentioned in my presentation, most data centers want to have access to two. If there's a physical failure at one, they want to be able to have a flip over to the other. So the robustness and redundancy of the grid is important. And you're right, the last kilometer is really critical, so there is no interruption. They generally want a direct line from the substation directly in, with nobody in between. No up and down.
Just for people to put things into perspective here, I think there are around maybe 60 substations in Iceland. We're a large country, so just to tell you that they can be, distant and few and far apart, basically. They're not around every street corner. But I just wanted to put that into perspective for the people that are not aware of how the transmission system for electricity works.
Yeah, so if it isn't, sometimes what they will do within the same substation is dedicated part. This transformer is for us only, and there's no other interruptions on the transformer. So the question is a good question. But I tell you proactively, what is happening with your competition is the development of what we call shovel-ready, ready-to-go sites for data centers, or any other industry. It could be aluminum smelters, it could be anything else. This idea of shovel-ready sites means that everything has been done. The power is available. You're not going to wait for extending a line. The broadband is there. The fiber is already to the site. All permitting is in place. There even may be designs ready to go to get you up and running. The idea is there's no time wasted getting the site prepared. So a data center specific business park with all infrastructure and all questions answered, all investigations done, all soil work done, all water table work done, all the geotechnical work is completed ahead of time. And that becomes a marketable advantage. That takes away this idea that, it'll be slow to implement here. You have a site ready to go. This is what your competition is doing. Ready to go sites, ready to start tomorrow.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask actually, Phil, you mentioned about building new sites and so on. Do you have any instances where that is done in the world, and who is actually then doing the investment, since the capacity needs to be available then, and to draw the business in, and somebody needs to do the investment in between. So who would that be?
I'm sorry. You cannot hear the mic, or I have to get really close?
Yes, I can hear.
Oh, you can hear it now. Could you repeat the first part of your question?
So no, I was wondering, I thought I understood you correctly, that you were saying that it would help if the sites were already available. So that people could just, or what shall I say, data centers could move into them, and who would do the investment? That's my question.
Well, the building isn't available. The site is available.
Ah, okay. So you're just talking. Oh, sorry, then I misunderstood.
Not the building. There are some of those, but that is extraordinarily risky because every data center will have different physical requirements within the structure of the walls. That you don't see so much. But I'm talking about the physical infrastructure and the ground itself. The ground is prepared. The electricity, the broadband, fuel if it's required, is all to the site, and all investigations have been done. So if zoning needs to be changed, it's already done. So they're not worried about the implementation of all the supporting infrastructure that has to come there. So the business park is ready to go. This is what the competition is doing. This is the trend in the world now, is ready-to-go sites. And this is, if you recall, this is a perception problem that others have of Iceland, that, well, then I have to get the ground, they have to rezone it, I'm going to have to get a permit, I'm going to have to bring the wire in, I'm going to have broadband has to come in. Now I'm looking at 18 months before I can even start construction, or at least a year. This is unacceptable. So taking that 12 months and say, the ground is ready, it's already leveled, the infrastructure is at the corner of the site, it can be brought in, and it will all be hooked up while I'm constructing the building. No problem.
Okay, since I've got the mic, if I may use the opportunity then to elaborate a little bit on targeting actually and finding our niche. For Iceland is a small market, and it is competing with data centers in the world. And it seems very much that if a big player is moving, then everyone thinks, okay, we lost that one. But there are so many other players around. So what would your advice be also for us? Which niche should we be following? We do, because as you said in your speech, the big ones are not necessarily always the ones that we should be after. Maybe our infrastructure is too, what shall I say, too small to accommodate for that. But which niches in the data center market should we be targeting to get the best results? Thank you.
Well, what I like to say is that that's the million-dollar question. Literally, a million-dollar question. This is something that has to be studied. It's an excellent question, of course. I will start by saying that I don't think your infrastructure is limited. Mm-hmm. You have almost infinite power. You have excellent broadband capability and cabling already in place. And it's not a matter of shortage of talent. That can be all rectified. So the primary inputs that go into a data center, these are not limiting factors for you. That said, there are going to be types of data centers that simply don't make sense for you, as you've assumed. And I mentioned some of them that have extraordinary latency requirements. So those you can do some analysis. But this is something that requires study. And in any target marketing, you are correct. You have to do the work to identify not only the types of companies, or let's say types of industries, then the types of companies, and then the geographic locations of them. Where are you going to have the most cultural affinity and acceptance? Maybe it's not North America, or at least maybe it's not the United States. Maybe it's Canada. I mean, maybe it's Germany. Maybe it's the UK, mm-hmm. Others that you have an affinity with. So this has to be done, this kind of marketing work, and I can't give you the answer sitting here immediately, but this is the type of work that needs to be done to hone your message around those particular types of data centers, but even the type of company the cultural requirements, let's say, of a bank versus an IT company, versus a gaming company, versus an automotive company that's looking to store data. They have different cultures. And I can't answer that question for you exactly, but that is something through market analysis that you can and should do.
Við verðum að hafa þetta loka orð dagsins í dag og ég þakka ykkur kærlega fyrir komuna. Ég þakka Landsvirkjun fyrir að hóa okkur svona saman á þennan merkilega fund og ég bara hvet ykkur til þess að kynna ykkur allt tengt þessum iðnaði og trúa með okkur á að þetta er björt og skemmtileg framtíð. Takk fyrir.